So today's video is going to be another true crime video. Today we're going to be talking about the solved case of Hannah Hill. Quickly before I get into this video, I just want to apologise for my true crime videos being kind of all over the place at the moment. I haven't had a set upload schedule, but yeah, I just want to let you know that we should be back on track now, and let's get into the video. So quickly before I get into it, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This is all just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. So Hannah Hill was an 18-year-old girl born in May of 1981 in Akron, Ohio in the US. Hannah was an only child who lived with both of her parents, and she had actually just graduated from high school, so she was really excited to just kind of get out on her own and like live her life. During the summer, she'd gotten herself a part-time job working as a secretary, she'd bought herself her own car, and she was going to start college after the summer. Hannah was a popular girl, she had a lot of friends, and she was actually crowned the Winter Queen at one of her school dances.
She would just come over to my house and we'd sit there and watch movies, play on the computer, talk, but on the weekends we went out a lot.
She also had a boyfriend, 19-year-old Brad Osborne, who she actually lived with for a short period of time before moving back in with her parents. Hannah's friends say that Hannah and Brad would argue a lot, and at times Brad could even be physically abusive towards Hannah, which is why she ultimately moved out of their living situation together and moved back in with her parents. But despite not living together, they were still in a relationship. On Wednesday, May 19th, 1999, Hannah got home from work as usual in the afternoon and got changed into her pyjamas, which is usually a telltale sign that you're kind of done for the day, you're not going back out again. Around 9 PM, Hannah called her friend Jennifer just to see what her plans were for the night, and then Hannah told Jennifer that she was just going to stay in. Hannah made a few more phone calls and then she got changed out of her pyjamas and told her mother Kimberly that she was going out, and so she left the house at 10 PM that night.
Her mother said that Hannah appeared to be disturbed. She appeared to be bothered. And she left the house and said she would see her later.
The following morning, Hannah's parents woke up and realised that Hannah never came home. And they just kind of assumed that maybe she'd stayed over at a friend's house, but then her boss called saying that she hadn't turned up for work either.
I knew something was wrong then. When nobody heard from her, Hannah just wasn't the type of person to ditch a job.
That evening on May 20th, Hannah's mother Kimberly decided to file a missing persons report with the Akron police. The missing persons report also included a description of Hannah's car that she drove and never came back home in, a 1996 Geo Prism. For reasons that remain unclear to this day, police took absolutely no immediate action on Hannah's missing persons case, and when they were called out on it years later, they just said that Hannah was 18-year-olds go missing all the time and turn back up, and that was the reason why they didn't really try to look for her. But Hannah's friends and family knew that she wasn't the type to just go off alone and go missing for 24 hours, and so with very little help from the police, her family began going around all her friends, everyone that Hannah knew, just asking them where she might be. Hannah's friend Jennifer was right at the front of the kind of family investigation, so she decided to go and speak to Hannah's boyfriend Brad Osborne, who said that he hadn't seen her, hadn't heard from her, and he was equally just as in the dark as the rest of the family. So then Jennifer searched through a bunch of other kind of mutual friends, including 20-year-old Denny Ross.
As of Denny, Hannah's missing. Nobody can find her. Nobody knows where she is. Have you seen her? He said, no, I haven't seen her.
So 2 days passed and there was still absolutely no sign of Hannah. There were no leads, nothing. And that was when police got a call about an abandoned Geo Prism that had been parked on the side of the road for a few days now, and it was just a few miles away from Hannah's home. However, at this point, Hannah's missing persons report hadn't yet been put on the police system, and so the person that took this call about this abandoned Geo Prism didn't know that there was a missing girl who owned a Geo Prism. And so he just sent someone out to put a parking ticket on it, not knowing that this was actually Hannah Hill's car. The next day, Brad Oborn, Hannah's boyfriend, went to the police station to try and urge them to look for Hannah quicker. And that was when they realised that he had scratches all over him. So they asked him about it, and he just said that him and Hannah had had an argument a few days before her disappearance, and she'd scratched him in this argument, that it wasn't anything too serious. Obviously, police were a little bit suspicious, but without any kind of evidence to link him to Hannah's disappearance, they couldn't do anything, they couldn't arrest him or anything. Police then released information about Hannah's disappearance case to the media in hopes that someone might read an article on it and come forward with another lead. In response, a number of people called the police station to say that there was an abandoned geoprism on the side of the road a few miles away from Hannah's home, just like that previous call. At least 2 of the people that called to report this car were told to call back tomorrow if it was still there, even though they were sure that this was Hannah Hill's car. The next morning, on May the 26th, a full week after Hannah's disappearance, police dispatched some officers to go and check out this car, finally. At 7:30 a.m, officers arrived at this abandoned car and nothing really seemed amiss, like it wasn't broken into. It just seemed like a normal parked car, and so they tried to get into it. Police managed to open the boot of the car, and there they found Hannah Hill's body in the trunk of her own car.
On the news, it said it might possibly be her body. But when they said that, I knew. Who else's body is going to be in the trunk of Hannah's car? I just broke down. I was hysterical. I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it whatsoever.
She was naked from the waist down. She had her jumper and her bra pulled up to her neck. She was also posed in a very sexually suggestive way, suggesting that there was probably a sexual assault aspect to this crime. She was absolutely covered in bruises, cuts, scratches all over her body, her arms, all over her face, which suggested that there was a real struggle in this murder.
We had a girl who was badly beat up, who was bruised in the back and bruised in the face. So if you have sex and you have a beating that eventually leads to a death, that is how you get the rape.
Obviously, local residents were really disturbed that it had taken police so long to find this body that they kept reporting to them. The body of a missing 18-year-old girl that everyone had been worried sick searching for a whole week. Her body had just been on the roadside, and these local residents had been reporting it, and even though it would have only taken police like 10 minutes to check this car, they didn't. And who knows, Hannah could have possibly been saved. Who knows if she was dead or alive when she was originally put into the boot of her car. Police didn't know that, and maybe if they'd have got there sooner, she could have possibly been saved. Immediately there were tons of officers assigned to this case because it was obviously a murder. This was no natural death. Someone did this and put her in the boot of her car. And so an autopsy was also done on Hannah's body. Her cause of death was found to be strangulation, and an unidentified white substance was found on her lip, and also a bite mark was found on one of her arms. They also found that she'd had sex shortly before her death, and while obviously we can't know for sure if it was consensual or not, the evidence points towards it not being consensual. But like I said, the way that Hannah's body was found, it all just points towards this being a sexual attack. She was naked from the waist down, her shirt was pulled up, and she was posed with her legs spread open. Like, it was clear that this attacker didn't value her dignity, and it all just pointed towards it being a sexual attack. Immediately, police focused in on one suspect in particular, Hannah's boyfriend, 19-year-old Brad Oborn. Like I said, Brad had abused Hannah in the past, and her friends could vouch for that. And he had scratches all over him at the time, and that doesn't look good. The day that Hannah's body was found, police began interviewing Brad Oborn in connection with her murder, and none of the kind of details of this questioning have ever been released to the public, and for an unknown reason, police decided to drop him as a suspect and didn't look into him anymore. So we have no idea what was said in that questioning, but police determined that it couldn't have been Brad Oborn, and so they began looking into different kind of suspects. Police recovered Hannah's mobile phone and found that she'd called several different friends on the night of her disappearance, including one friend in particular, 20-year-old Denny Ross. Hannah and Denny weren't close by any means. Well, that's what her friends thought. Obviously, none of us know. But Jennifer said that she wasn't very close to Denny. She'd just kind of attended a few parties at his house.
Denny's house was the party house because there was no adults. He had his own place, and you could do anything you wanted. Seriously, you could do anything. It didn't matter. And Denny didn't care.
He was young, immature, having fun, and hadn't settled down yet.
Denny Ross was known kind of as a player, not a very trustworthy individual, either as a friend or as a romantic partner, and Hannah knew that, and she told her friends that.
She told me that Denny was a real nice guy, but she told me to watch out for him, too. She said he's aggressive. Like, if he wants something, he'll try and go after it until he gets it.
Denny had actually been in trouble with police before. Just 2 months before this, he was caught trying to sell $500 worth of cocaine. Just 2 days before Hannah's disappearance, Denny pled guilty to cocaine trafficking and received 2 years of probation. On May 26th, the same day that Hannah's body was found, the same day that police ruled out her boyfriend as a suspect, they went to go see Denny Ross at his apartment. Not necessarily as a suspect, but just to kind of see if he knew anything. He was one of the last people that Hannah spoke to that night on the phone, so maybe he knew something that police didn't. When police got there, they saw that one of Denny's arms was broken and in a cast, and he told police that he'd broken it in a fight a couple of weeks prior. During his questioning, Denny told police that Hannah had come to his house at 11 p.m. on the night of her disappearance, something he had previously not told any of his friends, not told police as part of Hannah's missing persons investigation. Obviously, this is a huge piece of information because Hannah had been missing for a week before they knew that she was murdered, and so Denny was one of the last people to see her on the last day that she was seen. So unless he was guilty, why wouldn't he come forward to police and try and help? So police obviously found this pretty suspicious that he hadn't told them before now, and so they took Denny Ross into the police station for questioning. During his questioning, Denny told them that Hannah wasn't entirely happy in her relationship with Brad Oborn, and that was what they were talking about that night when she disappeared, that she wasn't happy.
Constantly trying to control her. So doesn't want to know where she's at, won't let her go anywhere with her friends or anything like that.
Denny said that the two of them, him and Hannah, kissed that night, but nothing more happened, and then she just left his house after midnight. So obviously it's very suspicious, like I said, that Denny spent a significant amount of time with Hannah on the last night that she was seen and just never told anyone, like not even his friends. He just never told anyone that this interaction took place.
I guess the big concern is if everybody in the world is looking for this girl, and if this girl is a friend of yours, why have you never said anything to anyone? Why have you never called the police and said, boy, that girl you're looking for, let me try to help you out?
That same night, police thought that Denny was so suspicious that they decided that they needed to get a search warrant as soon as possible. And so on the early hours of May the 27th, 15 officers turned up to Denny Ross's second-floor apartment.
As seen in this police videotape, detectives found what appeared to be spots of blood on the walls.
It was just throughout the apartment, on the shades, on the walls, I want to say on his sheets, blood all over the place.
Outside Denny's apartment, in line with one of his windows, one of the officers found a garbage bag underneath a bush. The officer that spotted the bag thought that he saw a shoe kind of object poking out, and so that's why they retrieved it and had a look inside. Inside it was a pair of women's pants covered in blood and feces, women's underwear, shoes, a purse, and it was all quickly identified as that of Hannah Hill. Immediately, within 24 hours of finding Hannah Hill's body, Denny Ross was arrested on suspicion of aggravated murder. But Denny never admitted to killing Hannah. He has maintained his innocence ever since day one, and his family believe him. Denny's father, Alan Ross, quickly put together a team of top defence lawyers to represent him, and they quickly began going over all the kind of evidence that was going to be presented in trial. The evidence obviously included that bag of Hannah's clothes, but there was also semen found in Hannah's underwear, and it was DNA matched to Denny Ross. If you remember, when Hannah's body was found, there was that unidentified white residue found on her lip, which now seemed to match the exact material that Denny Ross's cast was made of. And that bite mark on Hannah's arm seemed to perfectly match to Denny Ross's teeth. Obviously a very solid case against Denny Ross, but his defence lawyers claimed that they could find holes in this. They claimed that the state rushed to charge Denny, and that they didn't look into enough other people before quickly charging him. Obviously, because it had taken them so long to find Hannah's body when they could have easily found it within a day of her going missing, they really wanted to charge someone really quickly just to kind of make up for their poor police work in finding Hannah's body. And so Denny's team argued that they just kind of saw Denny, they saw some evidence and just rushed to charge him, and they didn't look into enough other people first. And like I said, Denny Ross was charged with aggravated murder, not just murder, because he was believed to have raped Hannah as well. And aggravated murder is actually a capital offence, meaning that Denny Ross could possibly face the death sentence.
I believe that Denny Ross is responsible for Hannah's death. I don't know if he did it alone or he had help, but I believe Denny did kill Hannah.
Like I said, Denny's defence's main argument was that police rushed to charge Denny without looking into enough other people first. On the day that Hannah's body was found, her boyfriend Brad Urban was their main prime suspect, and they really believed that it was him, and then after a couple of hours of questioning they just dropped him without a public explanation, and Denny's defense didn't like that.
There was no evidence that pointed toward him. There's a lot of innuendo. Well, geez, they had a rough relationship. Well, that's not really evidence.
Brad Urban also took a lie detector test and passed it completely. And I know I've said before that lie detector tests are not 100% accurate, they shouldn't be used in court, all that. However, when they already have a huge case as to why Brad didn't do it, it's just another weight on that case that Brad is innocent. But Denny Ross's defence felt that there were so many other leads that police just didn't look into.
Denny Ross's apartment was adjacent to an adult bookstore, and presumably there could have been some mischief there as well.
I'm gonna be real, I don't really know what they were getting at with that point, which is why I just put the whole interview clip in, but they think that the adult bookstore was a lead that the police didn't look into enough. There were also several different fast food wrappers found in Hannah's car, obviously, like she'd eaten at loads of different restaurants in the run-up to her disappearance and murder, and Denny's defence didn't think that the police looked into that enough. Like, maybe the person that Hannah went to these fast food restaurants with could have been a suspect. Like, maybe something weird happened while they were eating. Like, police just never tried to find out any of this. Police never went to speak to any of the employees at these restaurants. However, the first kind of decent thing that Denny's defence found was that even though there were all these kind of different blood spatters around Denny's apartment, none of them were Hannah Hill's. No one knows why there was blood in Denny's apartment. Maybe he'd had a fight with someone, who knows? But it wasn't Hannah Hill's blood. And so that does kind of take a little bit of the edge off of the argument that Denny killed her. There was also absolutely no evidence to link Denny to Hannah Hill's car. Obviously, whoever killed Hannah or someone put her in the boot of the car and drove this car out somewhere. But there were no fibres, no DNA, no hairs, absolutely nothing to link Denny to Hannah's car, but also to Hannah's body. There was nothing on Hannah's body either.
Now you have a man with a broken left hand living in a second-floor apartment who takes the corpse, drags it down the stairs, deposits it in this vehicle of hers, drove it 1.5 miles away, and then removed her pants and her panties with feces on them, puts it in a bag, and takes it home where he stores it for 8 days.
So there was no actual, forensic evidence in this case. It was all just more circumstantial. Like, she did happen to be at his house that night and they did find that bag of her clothes. However, nothing directly linked the two forensically. So at this point, there's a few different possibilities, and I'm just going to let you decide what you think at this point in the case. There's the possibility that Denny could have been framed. So like I said, there was no forensics linking him and Hannah. The only real thing that linked them was the fact that there was that bag of clothes on his property. But maybe someone else might have put it there. Maybe they saw Hannah leave that night, then attacked her, and then knew that they could easily plant it on Denny. Another possibility is that maybe someone helped him do it. Maybe someone did the actual murder. However, it was possibly maybe Denny's idea. Denny's apartment just happened to be the place where they were keeping the bag of clothes. Maybe he wasn't alone in it. And then the third possibility is that maybe Denny did do it, maybe he did murder Hannah, and maybe he was just very forensically lucky or very careful. However, it would be very, very hard to murder someone and not get any kind of fibres, DNA, hair, anything, anywhere near the body or in the car that he would have drove her out in. So maybe he was just very lucky or very careful. Anyway, Denny Ross's trial began on October 17th, 2000.
And I'm sure you will agree that only one man could have sexually assaulted, beaten, and killed Hannah Hill. And that man is sitting right there, Denny Ross.
Hannah's best friend Jennifer Edwards was called up to the stand to testify that Denny Ross had repeatedly lied to her through the week that Hannah was just known as missing, saying that he hadn't seen her that night when we know for a fact that he had.
He sat there and looked me straight in my eyes. I did not see any remorse, any sorry, anything in that boy's eyes at all.
It laid the groundwork, I think, for a good prosecution case. That here we know Hannah Hill had gone to his house because he later admitted it. So why would he be denying it to Hannah's friends repeatedly for 5, 6, 7 days?
The police that searched Denny's home that day were also called up to testify, and they said that they actually heard a noise like something hitting the ground as they were on their way up to his second-floor apartment. None of them went to go and check out this noise, none of them saw what made the noise. However, in retrospect, it could have possibly been Denny throwing this bag of clothes out of his window. Like I said, the bag was found in line with his window. But Denny's defence said that it would be stupid for Denny Ross to keep this bag of Hannah's clothes that would incriminate him in his house for a week after murdering her when he knew that police were on his case.
The defense argument was they planted it. And where they found it, I don't know. Or who, it may not have been the police. It may have been the actual person who committed the murder that put it there, knowing that she had left there.
If it was planted there by someone, this would explain why there was absolutely no forensics linking Denny to Hannah's body or to a car. And maybe there was reason for the police to want to plant Hannah's clothes on someone, to be able to arrest someone for this murder, because it had taken them so long to find Hannah's body when it was right there in front of them. It was such bad police work that maybe they just wanted to plant this on someone and get it over with and just arrest someone so that they could be seen to be doing their jobs properly. And so that is what Denny's defence said that they did to Denny. They just targeted him, they planted this bag of clothes on his property so that they could arrest him for the murder of Hannah, so that it looked like the police were doing their jobs. The state, so Hannah's side, not Denny's side, tried to argue that Hannah had been raped before she was murdered by Denny Ross. Obviously, we have definitive proof that she had sex before she was killed, that is forensic. However, the only person that can definitively tell us whether it was consensual or not is no longer here. She was murdered by someone, and that looks like the two are possibly linked. The fact that she had sex just hours before she was brutally murdered looks like the two are probably linked. Along with that, her body was beaten severely. If you remember, she had bruises, cuts, scratches all over her body. She was naked when she was left in the boot. She was posed, and all of that just says to me that it was rape, that it wasn't consensual. Denny's defense tried to argue that the two of them had had consensual sex that night before Hannah left his house, and then she left and then she got murdered, because there was no actual semen inside Hannah's body. It was just in her underwear. And Hannah's autopsy also showed that there was no actual physical damage done to that area of Hannah, and usually the case in rape is that there's usually some form of tearing or just some damage done because the attacker doesn't care for the comfort of the victim, which wouldn't be the case in consensual sex. However, it doesn't always 100% of the time result in physical damage to the victim. Like, it can happen either way, so I don't know how solid that piece of evidence is. But like I said, the only person that can tell us definitively if it was consensual or not was murdered and stuffed in the boot of her own car, naked, battered, and I just think that says something in itself. So if you remember, Hannah had that white residue on her lip, which was thought to have been from Denny's cast on his arm that he was wearing. At this point, it hadn't actually been confirmed that it was, but Denny's defense hired a chemist who said that the fibers found on Hannah's lip weren't necessarily from Denny's cast.
That material is also found, for example, in the materials that they make the liners for car trunks. It's just a very, very common element that you find in many things.
So now the jury had a few options. They could find Denny guilty of rape and murder, which could possibly result in him getting the death penalty. Or they could find him guilty of just murder and not guilty of rape, which would mean he would get a long sentence, but he wouldn't get the death penalty. Initially, the jury was very divided, especially when it came to that big piece of evidence, the bag of Hannah's clothes. Many of the jury believed that he had the bag of clothes, he was keeping it in his apartment for some sadistic reason. He saw the police come in and so he just threw them out of the window. But other members of the jury couldn't understand why he would keep this bag of clothes around that would incriminate him, and so they just didn't believe that that could be true.
The bag wasn't tied in any way. It was just crinkled at the top and dropped. Supposedly dropped. If this was dropped from the second-story window and it wasn't tied, how could it stay closed?
And a lot of these members of the jury thought that he possibly had been framed, be it by a policeman, be it by the real murderer, who knows. But they thought that Denny Ross could have been framed. At this point, the jury came to the conclusion that there wasn't enough evidence to conclusively say that Denny Ross raped Hannah Hill that night, which meant that the aggravated murder charge and the death penalty were out of the window. Some of them didn't think he was guilty of anything. Some of them thought that he was set up. However, a lot of them think he was guilty of just the murder portion, and so they went back to deliberate. A few minutes into this further deliberation, someone came into the room and told the jury to stop talking about this case and to just pause for a second. A couple of minutes earlier, the judge had been slipped a note that said that one of the members of the jury had been reading news reports on the Hannah Hill case, and when you're in a jury in court, you're not supposed to look at any outside information. You're only supposed to base your decision on what you hear in court. And this meant that if one member of the jury had been looking at other information that wasn't given to them in court, this meant that the jury was now biased. And what this particular juror that had been looking at the news saw was that Brad O'Born had taken a lie detector test and passed it. And so to this juror, he thought that if Brad was innocent, Denny Ross had to be guilty. And obviously that would affect how he felt about this trial. This outside information has changed his opinion, which can't happen in court. So the trial would have to be redone. But because they'd already signed the papers to say that Denny Ross was not guilty of rape, This would break double jeopardy. Double jeopardy means that once someone has been decided guilty or not guilty, they cannot be tried again for that same charge. And because the jury had already decided that Denny Ross was not guilty of rape, he couldn't be tried again for his aggravated murder charge, because aggravated murder is rape and murder in this case. And so Denny Ross couldn't be tried again. So because this one particular jury had to be thrown out because it was unfair and Denny Ross couldn't be tried again, he was let free. And so he wasn't definitively guilty or not guilty of the murder of Hannah Hill. He was just let free. He was put onto probation because obviously they're not going to just let a potentially dangerous person just completely free. So he was put onto probation. In 2004, 4 years after his trial, Denny Ross was sentenced to 25 years in prison for raping a woman in Akron. And if that doesn't give some weight to the rape charge in the Hannah Hill case, then I don't know what does. Finally, in September of 2012, an exception was made and a retrial was done into the murder of Hannah Hill. 13 years after Hannah's murder, Denny Ross was found guilty of murder, assault, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. He was sentenced to life in prison with eligibility for parole in 19 years, when he will be 67 years old. But yeah, that completes this case. Finally, after 13 years, Hannah Hill got some justice and this case is solved. I'm so glad that they did find that exception and retrial him. Like, it would have been so heartbreaking if they hadn't. Don't get me wrong, this case is heartbreaking enough as it is, but if all of this would have happened and still there was no justice, it would have been all the more heartbreaking. But yeah, let me know what you think of this case. Let me know if you do think that Denny Ross was guilty or wasn't guilty, because, I mean, yes, he's been sentenced and yes, it's official in the eyes of the law. However, who knows, because there was no specific like forensic link. So let me know what you think. I personally have no idea. Like, I want to think that he was guilty of this. Like, I don't want to think that he's been wrongly sentenced. But the thing that gets me every time is the fact that there was no evidence linking him to her body or to the car, other than the fact that they'd had sex. However, like I said, we don't know if they'd done it consensually before she was murdered. Who knows? Like, I genuinely just don't know what to think in this case. I think I do believe that he was guilty, honestly, because I just think the bag of clothes and then the fact that they'd had sex and then the fact that he never told anyone the whole time that she was missing, that he'd seen her that night, I just think it all kind of adds up in that way. I just think that he was probably very lucky or very careful with the kind of forensic side. I really want to know what you think. Sound off in the comments below. Make sure you leave a big thumbs up on this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe down below if you want to see some more from me, because I'm going to start uploading these videos a lot more often than I have been. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!